My name is Ben Lewis. I'm our Senior Director of Commercial Analytics and Guest Insights, a team that up until about 2 years ago did not exist. And I'm here to explain sort of how we've taken data at Spirit to create a cultural change and also lead to what we think will be a very remarkable turnaround strategy with regards to the brand and how we communicate more effectively with our guests. So I think the first thing you'll probably realize is that I'm saying guest instead of passenger or customer or any other nomenclature you would use to describe a passenger. And that's what we've decided very consciously to do from a perspective of really sort of understanding who our customer is. So real quick, leveraging real-time data and bringing the voice of the guest to life. This seems pretty common sense to most of you in this room, I presume. A lot of you guys have really rich data systems, probably have started collecting a myriad number of records of interactions, like for example, as the lady from Nobu was saying, you know, even getting down to the level of identifying people based on very colloquial interactions and storing that data in a very long record of appended data. We were collecting it, not well, and we weren't really organizing it in a way that was useful. So this is sort of going to be like a coming-of-age story, I would say, for Spirit. And hopefully those of you in the room will learn a little something about sort of the pitfalls that we experienced as we went through this process, and might learn something how to operationalize and avoid those things as you go through it yourself. So real-time data. I think this is the first step generally everyone tries to take when they're conceptualizing what their passenger or their guest is going through, which is they try to build a customer journey map, and then they realize that they have none of the information needed to make that happen. You can take guesses, you can put a whole bunch of stuff on the board, but in the end, it's all just hyperbole and conjecture until you start throwing data at this to flush it out. So that's what we did. We did that exact same thing. We went out, we said, these are the phases that we think that someone has to go through. This is what we think people are feeling when they're going through those things. And now now that we've created like these 10,000 hypotheses, how can we prove that this is true or not? So we created a Voice of the Guest program. And this was the entirety of the Voice of the Guest program, which is you have a data mart with a simple secure file transfer protocol that sends a batch of names and email addresses to some email vendor, and they send out a 10-question survey. And that was your entire listening program. And that's what that was like 2 years ago when I got here and started working on this. And when you think about this, we're flying 23 million people a day, and we're making them do 12 million hurdles. So we should have data everywhere. We should have just unimaginable amounts of data. So we decided, okay, well, we can take those 10 questions into 50 questions if you create multiple types of surveys. Very simple point. So we started sort of taking that send and sample list, breaking it up. But we're still relying on an SFTP that's sending twice a day, essentially. So you might get an email survey 12 hours after you flew, after you've completed your travel. So not particularly effective, not really good for response rates, and still you're very limited. So then we realized that if you catalog events, then you can take those events, send them over into the SFTP, and then you've enriched your data set. And then you have all this new stuff that you can use to further combine these pieces of information and create a lot of new analysis. And again, this all seems very simple, and you already know this stuff, but I'm telling you this is the process we went through, and it sucked. So hopefully you'll learn something from it. And then we realized that those events could trigger specific types of email surveys, and then you really get to broaden how you're collecting and making sure you're targeting the right person with the right email survey. And so this is kind of where we're at now until about a month from now when we're going to move to sort of what this full rollout of a Voice of the Guest program looks like, which is creating a web services API that will launch real time and allow you to send out something within 5 minutes or 3 minutes or 2 seconds after they've had an event in your system. Someone's really excited about this. I'm very happy that this is leading to this level of engagement. because this is all just jargon at this point. And with that, you can actually trigger very short, smaller, SMS-based microsurveys. So if you have an experience with a ticket counter agent and all you want to know is how they felt about that interaction, something you have to collect very, very immediately or else it becomes irrelevant, you can send out a simple 1 to 2 question SMS-based, text-based survey, and you can reply on the spot, and you get a 90% response rate versus an email where you're going to get maybe a 15, 20, 30% response rate. And then you have all this data. And what are you going to do with it, right? So this is where the operationalizing the data comes into play. A lot of services that are acting as sort of like your voice of the customer platform are going to do something called ticket creation for you. Almost every single survey platform does this these days, which is they'll take all this information, they'll scan it for keywords, topics you want to see. Maybe you'll have filters based on particularly negative scores. Take that information and start generating tickets and then directing those tickets to the right people for addressing those concerns. So this turns that feedback immediately into a push notification to certain decision makers in the company, or for our future vision, to every one of our 10,000 frontline employees. And that is the dream, right? So every single person can know exactly what they're doing and how that's affecting how the guest perceives their experience. So that's the dream. We've already started a little bit with it. We have a social listening platform. We are working with CX Social for the meantime, which is a Clarabridge product. They're very good at text analytics. They can actually parse language very, very naturally and really come up with some organic thoughts and concepts. So right now we're using that to go through our social channels. This is a huge change in the way we used to do things. If you went back 2 years with Spirit and you went to our Facebook page or our Twitter page, you would have been confronted with what we called the autopilot, which was literally a robot that would respond to you based on keywords that you entered into your text message, and we wouldn't interact with you beyond that. So essentially, we would direct you to the proper channel through our website, but otherwise we were basically saying, don't bother us, which is not the correct way to go about a customer service strategy. So we started listening, and we turned on this as a live managed channel, so we actually have real people behind it. And we actually now have the fastest response of any airline in the industry at the moment with our social program. So we also have launched interactive website feedback. So depending on what page of our website you're on, you're going to get prompted with surveys and persistent feedback buttons, and also exit modals. So if you go to scroll up to the top of your window to click out, we'll ask you why are you leaving, so we can get better engagement as to how you're going through that purchase funnel. And then once you've completed purchase, we'll also ask you about sort of what you bought and why. And getting that very immediately helps us drive merchandising decisions and sort of understanding what drives someone to make specific types of purchases. And I would say that airlines are just we're swimming in data, and we often don't know what to do with it, right? So we've actually gone through the company, and literally we spend about 2 weeks with every single department, and I think we're on like department number 20 or something at this point. And our team basically just looks at all the data they have available and then sees new and unique ways to read what they have. And one of the things we found is we found some kiosk timestamps, and we found some check-in agent timestamps. We tied that stuff together, and now we have a live view of literally how long every single person who had that interaction stood in line between those two interactions. So we're actually going through the company and building out sort of live operational data that you can tie into these listening posts as well to create sort of expectations, et cetera, that didn't really exist before. And so with this one's actually really interesting. I was searching for the slide and I couldn't find it. But we have a question in our survey that says, how long were the lines to check your bag? That's a very simple question. And we had this huge internal debate because some people in the company wanted to measure it in like actual minutes, like have the customer tell you how many minutes. And some of us said, we want to make it more attitudinal, how long they thought it felt, right? And what we did is we went with the attitudinal route and then paired it up with the lobby line times. And by putting those two things together, you actually get expectation, which is how long does someone expect to stand in a line when they go, and how long is uncomfortable, and what's going to ruin their experience, and all those great things, and how that influences Net Promoter Score, et cetera. And essentially, we found that the acceptable amount of time to stand in a line to check your bag is somewhere between 6 and 10 minutes, which seems pretty common sense, maybe even on the long side, but it's about 6 and 10 minutes. And I think if you've ever flown an airline where you've stood in line longer than that, you would personally feel the anxiety that you're going to miss your flight or you're not going to have time to get through security. So it makes sense from a very common sense perspective. And that sort of gets to the next point, which is this data that we're collecting and organizing and building out is really only useful if you use it. So we do a lot of interesting analysis trying to figure out essentially what is it that people expect from us. And so all those other dots that I've unlabeled because we have friendly competitors in the room, we left these two out here because we found this to be very interesting. I think this is something that's sort of universal for everyone, which is that as far as a Net Promoter Score driver for Spirit, we get a lot of credit for having low fares. So if you read this chart, the way to read this chart is along the x-axis is your performance, and along the y-axis is your correlation to your Net Promoter Score. So basically, x-axis, how well are you doing, and then y-axis, how important is it to your guest. So if you see low fares, really performing well on that. We do that. We do that better than anyone else in the industry does. Now, that said, why doesn't that low fare communicate to value? And that reason is essentially that value is experience divided by price. And I'm sure you've heard this over and over and over again, and someone's beaten it to your head repeatedly, which I'm about to do. And essentially, this is inherently true. And what we found at Spirit is that we have just we were trying to make this equation work exclusively by lowering the price. And we found that there was actually a lot of upside in sort of the enhancing the experiential aspects, which we sort of left unattended in this drive for maintaining this bottom position in price. And we actually found that there's probably a limit there. And so we started fixing that. So you'll look at like some basic metrics, right? So when you have a bare bones product like on-time performance, like if you're only offering the getting from point A to point B, something that's very important in delivering that service is actually getting you there from point A to point B when you expected it, right? So on-time performance is one of those really key drivers of how satisfied you're going to be with an air travel experience. And if you looked at it historically, we were systemically underperforming the industry in this metric. And that undermined the credibility of the product, really eliminated that value aspect, right? We also had a relatively high mishandled bag rate per passenger. But I will tell you that now, for about the past year and a half, we've actually had the best mishandled bag metric in the entire industry. But it took a big change to get that number down to where we would actually focus on that and make that a priority. And these are those definitions that I think when people talk about journey mapping, they define these things as moments of truth, the things that are going to make or break your overall experience. And we found those things to be some of the big things, right? So did we get you there on time? And did you get there with the stuff that you wanted to bring? And if we do those two things, offering a bare bones product, you're generally going to be satisfied because you entered into that bargain that the price is the product. But we also found that there's more that you can do with the product itself. Can we get you through the process efficiently? So for airport experience, we deployed new kiosks, hardware, and software in 2017 because we had kiosks out there that were 10 years old. Literally, it took like 4 or 5 seconds once you hit the button for the next page to load. And when you think about that from not just a user experience problem because you guys get angry essentially when you hit your phone and it doesn't immediately send a beam to space and back and fetch you all the things that your friends ate for lunch. It's kind of like, it also has an operational impact, which is essentially that if you take 5 more seconds per page and you have to go through 10 pages, that means your kiosk interaction time just went up 50 seconds per unit, and you're processing 23 million people a year, which means you've wasted countless lives, essentially, in aggregate. And those people essentially means that that timeline that you're going to take to check in went from essentially maybe 15 minutes to 18 minutes or 19 minutes, just on wasted processing time alone. And we could fix that very easily by just replacing the tech, and we actually found that we saved on maintenance costs on those as well because they didn't go down as often and it didn't take as many people to support them. And it's just one of those things where just a little bit of investment really expanded the overall experiential design. We've also started enabling self-bag tagging as well, so we don't need as many people on the front line to allow as many bags to get processed with limited resources. And we've also found that those self-bag tags produce a better customer experience because millennials specifically don't like interacting with people. So by just being able to allow that to be a self-service option, you've really allowed them to interact with the business the way that they want to interact with the business. And then we started asking questions about sort of how well was it to get through the airport. So because of the stimulative effect of Spirit fares, we find that we have a disproportionate amount of first-time flyers. So we actually learned that our signage needed to be different because of that. We actually had to really direct them and make sure that they knew exactly where to go for the next step. So we're putting a lot of effort into really correcting and testing that signage to make sure that we're providing the level of information that they need to manage the process effectively. And so what we've also found is the results are excellent and entirely worth what we're doing. So this is the DOT complaint rate, which is publicly available. It comes out every month in something called the Air Travel Consumer Report, which used to be the bane of our existence, but now we're pretty happy with it. And essentially, this is how many people complain to the US government through the DOT about each airline per 100,000 enplanements. So if you look back in May of 2015, we hit this peak of about 20 people per 100,000 complaining about us because we weren't delivering the product that they expected. We were not meeting their expectations in any way, shape, or form. And now, while we're still above industry, you'll see that we're taking just amazing corrective action to try to get down to where everyone else is. And we know that we operate a different business model. We know that we are not going to be like everyone else in terms of what we offer in our core offering and the additional level of education it takes to successfully fly Spirit. But we do believe that even with those challenges, we can get down to where the industry is in terms of complaints because we know we can deliver a fast and optimized experience. Our guest relations CSAT score is higher than it's ever been. I couldn't get this updated in time. I built this a little bit last night, sorry. But we actually have seen another 3 or 4 percentage point increase on this since then. Our Net Promoter Score, we also neutralized this because of friendly competition. But we neutralized this, turned it into an index, but these increases you're seeing in our Net Promoter Score here are 100% real, and we actually are expecting to see about 75% of that gap that you see in between 2016 and 2017 by the time we end 2018. And that will actually put us in line with about American United. So, and what used to be a social media channel that we were afraid of because it was filled with terrible, terrible things, is now something that we are actually very proud of, which is very cool. So we actually are starting to see tons of people talking about the business in ways that we're enabling something that they didn't have the opportunity to do before, or that we are enabling long-distance relationships, or turning that one vacation into 3 vacations, or when you finally get to that vacation spot, being able to go to the Biltmore brunch or something like that. Which, when you get that kind of feedback and you're delivering that kind of experience, it's validating, and it's something that the industry needs. Because if you have seen what the industry has gone through, over the past 10 years, you've seen consolidation, you've seen fares going up, and we're enabling a whole band of people to travel in a way that they weren't able to do before. And so the largest thing we've actually accomplished is that we have, using data, changed the company culture of Spirit. So what used to be what I would call a penny-wise, pound-foolish culture of maximizing cost savings without regard to anything else has turned into a place where Ted Christie, our president and will be our CEO in 2019, has come out and made a pledge to customer improvement and to really making our guests experience something that's worth celebrating. And I think that the big differentiation is that we no longer want to be the airline of last resort. And that's a huge shift, because if you went from a place where the price is your product, and that was the thing you were going to hang your hat on, in an industry that is as price elastic as the airline industry is, to say that you're going to compete on a myriad of other things, that's a very large shift that had to be sold to a bunch of people who, Ted was literally the CFO of the machine that he built, and he has now come around to realize that there is value in the intangibles. So we've launched a campaign called Invest in the Guest. And so this is something we launched about 2 weeks ago, where we've launched a website along with it where you can watch our progress and watch us win at all these things. Actually, one thing I forgot to mention on the on-time performance when I showed you the disparate sort of levels is actually for the past 8 months, we have been around 4th out of the 12 large airlines in the United States for on-time performance. And that's because we invested the money and resources into making that happen. And that's one of the many things you can actually see through our Invest in the Guest website. And with this Invest in the Guest campaign, we also went ahead and launched our first product of an initiative, one of many, which is that we're going to put world-class fast Wi-Fi on all of our planes. And we've realized that there's a lot of guest experience there to be made. And it's obviously a way to collect data as well, and we can further enhance these experiences using that data in a new and interesting way. So this Wi-Fi is literally the fastest available air-based, satellite-based Wi-Fi system for Spirit. This is sort of in comparison to what we saw in the first generation, which is what Delta initially launched, where it was sort of ground-based and fairly slow and had a relatively poor customer experience. This Wi-Fi will also cover all of our routes, with the exception of maybe the last 3 hours from our Fort Lauderdale to Lima network, which is fairly impressive. Very few other airlines have actually gotten to this global scale of Wi-Fi enablement. So, and this is a little bit too long, but I would say that this is indicative of the types of product enhancements that you're going to start seeing from Spirit. We found that being an ultra low-cost carrier doesn't mean that you have to be no frills, that you have to be sort of the bargain basement. There's a place for customer experience in every business, and I think that we're going to very soon prove that we can attract everyone to fly Spirit. There's value for everyone there. And oh, wrong button. We're not going to go through that video again, are we? There we go. And that's the idea, right? There is no specific segment for Spirit. We should be a universally loved brand. And we're quickly approaching that. And I think that, if you look at us a year from now, everyone will be flying us because we will have the cost, we will have the product, we will have the operational efficiency, and we have the structure built up to do that and to put information into the hands of people to continue this development and make Spirit a world-class airline. So, thank you very much for hearing me out.
Thank you, Benjamin. That was a great presentation.
Perfect.
Really joined.
Thanks.
I think the audience would have a lot of questions.
Yep.
And questions?
Ben, thank you very much. That was a very inspirational story to end today's brand sessions with. Thank you for being so honest. I think you helped us understand your struggles and your journey, and you shared a little bit about the things the lessons you learned, the things that didn't go so well right at the start. But what was the biggest thing that surprised you? Maybe the fastest, quickest, dirtiest trick in the book that actually delivered some kind of result for you.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the first thing is really getting into the broad topics and figuring out where your severe points of failure are. And I would say that a lot of that's going to be common sense. There are some things that are visibly evident actually I would take that back. If your program is in poor enough shape, everything is going to be noise. You won't be able to tell what's the most important because everything will be important. So the first thing you have to do is actually make some progress so you can start eliminating that level of noise. And once you've eliminated that level of noise, then is where you're going to start getting real insight. But yeah, don't try reading too early until you've gotten to some sort of operationally consistent baseline.
Thank you. Your business is very unique, and I had a question in terms of when you were talking about data collection and analyzing that data. Since your business is in so many different places, I was wondering how the airport experience is blended or considered when you're looking at the results of your data from your customer experience.
Right. So that's interesting because I think that we view it kind of differently, right? This actually sort of goes into sort of persona creation versus segmentation as well. So if you think about sort of the customer experience or the guest experience in our case, once you get to the airport, there's only a few different channels that you're going to go through. And that channel is set up based on what kind of web or shopping experience you had leading up to that. So if you're talking about how those two things directly relate, our business model is hinged on sort of breaking out all these ancillaries, which some people might deem necessary to fly, especially if they've been trained to think that way. If you think about a GDS customer, that GDS customer is going to act very differently than someone who has come through your web channel, because that web channel has offered all these different opportunities to buy ancillaries or to become informed about the product and actively deselect what they want. With a GDS customer, they never really were presented that, and they just see the $29 fare and think they got the best deal in air travel that has ever existed. And so at that point, your airport experience is about mitigating and making sure that customer is ready to go. So to me, the web experience is the foundation of what kind of future guest experience you're going to deliver and how satisfied they're going to be at the end. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Okay. Thank you, Ben. Thank you for the
Yep.
great presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Amazing.